Yo, yo, yo. This is day 19 of reading every single day for the rest of my life. Let me get 30 minutes started. All right. 30 minutes starting now. Manage the load. It cost Greg Popovich $250,000, but it got him two more division titles in his fifth championship. It also changed the NBA and all of sports. In 2012, the San Antonio Spurs were coming off a 6-game road trip. It was their fourth game in 5 nights, just 24 hours after their victory over the Orlando Magic and 70 hours after a double overtime victory over the Raptors. 1,700 miles away from Toronto, it was compressed 66 games scheduled away in Toronto. It was compressed 66 games scheduled with more back-to-back games than ever before. More than that, in the previous season, two Popovich stars, Manny Ginobili and Tony Parker, had gone straight from the playoffs to the Olympics, where they started from for their respective national teams. Tim Duncan, perhaps the best power forward to ever play, was in his sixth year in the league. Collectively, they had upward of 3,000 professional games among them, and consistently went deep into the playoffs. As part of the Spurs dynasty, which was built around workhorse role playing, and sustained excellence. Popovich's decision to deliberately rest four of his best players during a national televised game was shockingly controversial. The team wanted them to play. The fans were pissed and wanted refunds. The TV announcer were livid and so were the channels that had paid for the broadcast rights. Other coaches complained, and athletes condemned him. The league's punishment was swift and costly, but Popovich had the discipline to play a longer game, to strategically rest his athletes so that they would never have enough gas to make a deep run into the playoffs, and so that they could live longer careers and continue to play at an elite level. The simple name for it is load management. We've done this before in hopes of making a wiser decision, rather than a popular decision, he told a reporter of what would become of ambiguous coaching practice. Sorry, I don't know how to say that. It's pretty logical. Logical? Yes. Burnout and injuries are way more expensive than time off. Was it popular? No. And definitely not easy. When we are committed, when we are driven, when we want to win, self-discipline most often takes the form of getting up earlier and getting more work done. But sometimes the harder choice, the greater exercise is in restraint, is to rest. It's to manage the load instead of throw it on your shoulders or knees without thinking. Although they come off, although they come from very different places, the desire to skip a workout and the impulse to work out too much end up in the same place. It's a short-term bargain with long-term consequences, just as the cost of the pleasure of the candy bar or the drug is paid for down the line, with interest. And if that's unaffordable for athletes in their relatively brief careers, think about how much more pronounced this is for the rest of us. We're in this career. We're going to be on this grind for decades. We're in this for life. You think you're going ahead by taking on a bit more, by pushing a little further. You think it's impressive to push through a little warning signs of pain. No, you're missing the point. John Steinbeck referred to this as the indiscipline of overwork, reminding himself that it was the falsest of economies. The proof? Teams that peaked too early, career-ending injuries, books that were clearly rushed, bad decisions made under pressure, days missed due to preventable illness, burnout, or worse. Nobody worked harder for America than James Forrestal. He left a career on Wall Street twice. First to become a fighter pilot in World War I, and then in 1940 to be an assistant secretary of the Navy. It cost him literally hundreds and thousands of dollars in lost salary, but he did it and revolutionized the Navy in the process, essentially winning World War II as a result. There would have been no success for Eisenhower nor MacArthur were it not for the tireless efforts of James Forrestal. After the war, he became America's first Secretary of Defense. where he was tasked with unifying the armed forces into a single department. It was a job of endless responsibilities and enormous egos, constituting millions of soldiers and civilians and miles of ocean. Those who observed him could see the toll the job took on him, and the toll the job took on him, on his marriage, or anything resembling a life outside the office. "Why don't you go home?" an aide said to him after finding him working late once again. "Go home?" Forrestal replied. "Home to what?" Instead, Forrestal kept working, working, working. Even as the pounds melted off, his skin hollowed and sagged. He was clearly depressed, clearly unsatisfied, clearly struggling, but he pushed on. His decision-making suffered. He rarely smiled. He felt unappreciated. Even when the role ended, as all political appointments do, he couldn't stop. He ground on. Soon enough, he ended up in the hospital, where he took his own life by jumping out of a hallway window. His last words remain unknown to us, but we can see what he was reading, as he left a page from Sophocles marked up, perhaps as a tragic warning to his fellow work addicts and all of us who have trouble turning it off. Worn by the waste of time, comfortless, nameless, hopeless, save in the dark prospect of the yawning grave. Yes, our work is important. Yes, we hustle. Yes, our drive is how we became successful. Our love of the game is what got us here. But without the ability to rein this in, we will not last. We don't just want to be the fast and strong now. We want to be fast and strong for a long time. We want to keep winning. But nothing left unchecked lasts for long. Nobody without the ability to self-govern is qualified to govern. That includes not just prodding yourself forward, but also resting yourself, finding balance, listening to your body when it tells you I'm about to break. Absolute activity of whatever kind, Goyath said, ultimately leads to bankruptcy. Even the great Louis Gehrig knew this for sure. He had the longest streak in baseball on many occasions. But on many occasions, if he could feel his performance suffering mid-game, he took himself out and called for a pinch hitter. His coaches knew this too, famously raining out a game on a cloudless day on a polo ground so that Louis may have a day to recover. And of course, there were the off season too, a feature of athletic life that those of us in other professions should consider adopting. No one is invincible. No one can carry on forever. Each of us can end up like James Forrestal. Even iron eventually breaks down or wears out. Do you want people to look at you in a few years when you were a husk of your former self and think about what could have been? Cool. If you had stayed healthy, if you had something left in the tank, if you hadn't wasted all that potential. To last, to be great, you have to understand how to rest. Not just rest, but relax too. Have fun too. After all, what kind of a success is it if you can never lay it down? The most surefire way to make yourself more fragile, to cut your career short, is to be undisciplined about rest and recovery, to push yourself too hard, too fast, to overtrain and to pursue the false economy of overwork. Manage the load. I resonate with this specific chapter or part, specifically because in the past I would always feel like I always have to have lots to do during the day and my whole schedule should be filled, and I think you should set aside time for yourself to relax and have fun. I think like for me a hobby would be like video games to escape, I guess, to have fun. But yeah. Okay. Sleep is an act of character. The night before fought Archie Moore for the title in 1956. The night before he fought Archie Moore for the title in 1956, Floyd Patterson executed the single most important part of his training regime. It wasn't some last-minute conditioning or another review of the fight plan. He went to sleep. Not for a few fitful winks, but for 11.5 hours, waking up just in time for the morning weigh-in. And before he left the arena, he took a 3-hour nap, and then he napped in his dressing room before he entered the ring, where he knocked out the exhausted champion in the 5th round. When we're going toe-to-toe with one of the best boxers of all time, you better be well rested. When you train as hard as Patterson's did, you better make sure you're also giving the body time to recover. Everyone else was nervous. Everyone else was checking and rechecking plans. But Patterson was asleep, not because he didn't care about those things, but because he cared about the most. Because he cared the most. While the ability to sleep quickly and rest, what was that? While the ability to sleep quickly and rest well might not seem like a matter of discipline, it very much is. In fact, in the armed forces, they refer now to the idea of sleep discipline. It's something you not only have to do, but something you have to enforce in yourself, in terms of both quantity and quality. The higher the stakes, the more driven you are, the more stressful the situation, the more discipline sleep requires. In the Persian Gulf in the 1990s, future four-star Admiral James Stavridis had just been given command of a sharp ship for the first time. This occurred at exactly the same time he noticed at age 38 that his natural metabolism and his infinitely youthful ability to just gut it out had begun to decline. You don't have to be the most self-aware person on the planet to see that you make worse decisions when you're tired, and that you're less able to work well than others, that you have less command of yourself and your emotions. But it was still a considerable innovation for Stavridis. How do I pronounce his name? Stavridis to decide to treat sleep as an equally important part of a functioning warship as its weapon system. In response, he began to monitor the sleep cycles of his crew. Sorry, those aren't the right alarms. In response, he began to monitor the sleep cycles of his crew, moderate their moderate their watch duties, and encourage naps wherever possible. Watching our physical health, he would write later, specifically referring to sleep, is an act of character and can be enormously help with our ability to perform. Our moments of peak performance rarely come when we are exhausted, when we are running on fumes, when we are blary and dependent on caffeine. And even if they sometimes do, they shouldn't have to. Waking up early to grab those few hours before daylight, before the noise, this is important. But Toni Morrison wouldn't have been able to do that, nor would there have been much point. If she had stayed up late the night before mindlessly watching television, imagine how much more brilliant Hemingway's mornings could have been. Were they not so frequently hungover ones? Certainly, Marcus Aurelius's debate with himself about whether to stay under the covers would take on a different meaning. Had he only just gotten in them a couple hours before? Meanwhile, we're at home, burned out after a long day. We made dinner, we exercised, we put the kids to bed. We caught up on an email. We're so exhausted it feels like all we can do is just veg out on the couch. When in fact, we need one final push of discipline, picking ourselves up and walking to the bedroom and passing out. It will solve so many of your problems. You're tired, you don't want to work out. You're tired, so you procrastinate. You're tired, so you need that coffee, so you pop that pill. You're tired and you make bad decisions that eat up hours and hours of work that should be spent on things that matter. We say I'm not a morning person, but that is almost certainly because we have been an irresponsible or undisciplined evening person. That just makes so much sense. The best way to master the morning is to have mastered it the night before, just as anyone who has ever sleep trained an infant learns. Sleep begets to sleep, so too does discipline beget discipline. Early to bed, early to rise, makes a man young, wealthy, and wise. I just snuck that in there, sorry. Early to bed, early to rise. Under the blankets is no way to fame, Dante said of the morning, and yet, paradoxically, getting under the blankets consistently, reasonably, without delay is the way to fame, or at least to solid performance once one has leapt from bed and out the door. You want to think clearly tomorrow? You want to handle the small things right? You want to have the energy to hustle? Go to sleep, not just because your health depends on it, but because it is an act of character from which all our other decisions and actions descend. And the phrase sleep training is operative there. It's not something we always do naturally. It takes work, practice, and commitment. What can you endure? Endure. In the winter of 1915, Ernest Shackleton's Arctic expedition got stuck in the ice. For nearly a year, they drifted aimlessly, the crew powerless to change their condition. Then suddenly, the pressure from the ice cracked the hull of the ship and it sank. A 350-mile dash and the lifeboats finally put them on dry land, the uninhabitable Island, for the first time in 18 months. Yet their physical ordeal was not even close to over. In fact, it had only just begun. Unlikely ever to be discovered by passing ships on this remote island, with little to eat and moral dwindling, Shackleton proposed a bold plan. He and a few men would travel more than 700 miles to find help. With only a few weeks' supplies, he and a small crew braved hurricane-strength winds and the open ocean in a 20-foot boat. Think of his body against the elements, the hunger gnawing at his bones, the aching of his muscles. Arriving in South Georgia in April 1916, he was safe. But Shackleton knew his mission was only half done. Knowing that his men had very little time, he rushed to raise funds and supplies to return to Elephant Island and rescue the men he had left behind. After 4 months and multiple desperate attempts, he succeeded, bringing every man on the voyage home alive. Dang. How did he do it? How did he not only survive but emerge unbroken, undaunted from this past experience? His family motto tells us, Fortitude Vincimus, by endurance we conquer. Fittingly, this was the name of the ship as well, the Endurance. But imagine those long winter months. Imagine those days at sea. He moved himself through that. He did not quit. He never let his body quit. He ran a marathon after marathon after marathon. It wasn't just that he knew what his duties were as a captain. He was also strong enough physically and determined enough to temperamentally to fill them despite every conceivable obstacle. Meanwhile, we're tired because we have to put in some time at the office. We resent the coach putting us through an extra round of drills. Instead of wanting things to be easy, you should be prepared for them to be hard. Because they will be. There's an old German word, Sitzfleisch, which basically means sitting your butt in the chair and not getting up until the task is complete, even as it goes numb, even as one by one the people around you call it a day, showing up yourself day after day until your back aches, your eyes water, and your limbs turn to mush. Many a great conqueror in the days of horseback were called Old Iron Ass for their ability to stay in the saddle. This is a trait that far too many of us are lacking. We think we can make up for it with brilliance or creativity, but what we really need is commitment. What we need is willingness to put our body where the problem is, showing ourselves completely into solving it, to show that we are not for turning, that we will not be deterred. Dang. Almost all great leaders, great athletes, great philosophers have been tough. They've been able to endure. That's what it takes. Sacrifices. Pushing through frustrations. Pushing through criticisms and loneliness. Pushing through pain. Edison tested 6,000 filaments, one by one, in his laboratory, before he found that one that brought us light. Toni Morrison was up early, all those tired mornings sitting in the chair, watching the sun come up. Shackleton refused to abandon his responsibilities, refused to stop until he had brought his people home. It took Franklin Delano Roosevelt 7 years of painful physical therapy and exercise to convalesce from polio. Convalesce from polio. I don't know how to say that. And each day after, even after getting down the hall or stepping up to a podium, was a feat of strength. Think of FDR, struck in the prime of his life with a virus that left him permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Churchill, writing about FDR before the outbreak of the war, would detail the incredible perseverance his 7-year recovery required. His lower limbs refused to move. Crutches or assistance were needed for the small movements from place to place. To 90 out of 100 men, such an affliction would have terminated all forms of public service except those of the mind. He refused to accept this sentence. FDR refused to accept his sentence. He refused to let his body decide who was in charge. He did not surprise Churchill then to see the fortitude with which Roosevelt tackled the Great Depression or the hurly-burly of American politics in a decade when they were exceptionally darkened by all the hideous crimes and corruption of gangsterdom which followed upon Prohibition. And his energy and enthusiasm in World War II followed still from this too. Meanwhile, we're ready to call it quits after first round of submissions are rejected. We consider it a crime against humanity that the profession demands more than 40 hours a week. We fold our business after one slow sales period. We declare recovery impossible after the injury. We listen when we're not big enough, not pretty enough, not talented enough. We look at the scoreboard and believe that it's hopeless. Does endurance always conquer? Of course not, but nobody wins by throwing in the towel. Nobody wins with weakness. We will taste pain on this journey, that's a fact. We will be given a million opportunities to stop, and a million reasons why that's okay. But we can't, and it's not. We keep going. We put our butt in the chair. We will not be deterred. Beyond the body. Those who think that they can live in a high spiritual life whose bodies are filled with idleness and luxuries are mistaken. We are mortal beings. This matters not just because it means that each of us will die, but in order to live, we must do certain things. Eat, sleep, move, and of course, the better we do these things, the better care we take care of our body, the better shape we'll be in. It's important to understand that temperance isn't about life without pleasure. In fact, a major reason we practice self-discipline is that we might live longer, or at least since that is out of our control. As Louis Gehrig typically illustrates, that we might live well while we live. People pay for what they do, writer James Baldwin wrote, and still for more in what they have allowed for themselves to become, and they pay for it simply by the lives they lead. The fact is, the body keeps score. The decisions we make today and always are being recorded daily, silently and not so silently in who we are, what we look like, how we feel. Are you making good decisions? Are you in control? Or is it your body? I feel like there's a typo there. This matters not just physically, but also mentally and spiritually. Temperance in the body affects the mind, and just as much, intemperance and excess physically prevent the mind from working as it should. The neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett has explained it in terms of body budget. Our brain regulates our body, but if we're physically bankrupt, the brain cannot possibly do its job. If you wonder why people make bad decisions, why they are not resilient, why they are distracted, why they are afraid, why they are caught up in thrall of extreme emotions, if you wonder why you do these things, well, it starts with the body. In addiction circles, they use the acronym HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, as a helpful warning rubric for the signs and triggers for a relapse. We have to be careful, we have to be in control, or we risk losing it all. When we speak of temperance and self-discipline, we are referring to a person who has themselves under control. The body is the first step in that journey. We treat it rigorously, we restrain it, we dominate it, we treat it like a temple. Why? So it may not be overrun and override by the mind, so it may not deprive the mind. In that sense, we are constraining ourselves physically to free ourselves mentally and spiritually. No one who is a slave to their urges or to sloth, no one without strength or a good schedule can create a good life. Certainly they will be too consumed with themselves to be too much good for anyone else. Those who tell themselves they are free to do anything will inevitably be chained to something. Discipline is how we free ourselves. It is the key that unlocks the chains. It is how we save ourselves. We choose the hard way, because in the long run, it's actually the only way. That's deep. Part 2. The inner domain. The temperament. What man is happy? Who has a healthy body, a resourceful mind, and a docile nature? Thalius. The body is just one vehicle for our self discipline. History is replete with talented people, athletes, creative executives compl- who had complete command of their physical form but were profoundly a mess everywhere else. It doesn't matter how much discipline we exert over what we eat or when we wake up if we are riven by distraction, at the mercy of biases or bad moods, given over to temptation, impulses, or instinct. This is no way to live. In fact, this intemperance condemns a person to never reach their full potential, with perpetual misery as a possible chaser. True self-control means moderation, not just what we do, but also how we think, how we feel, how we comport ourselves in a world of chaos and confusion. If anything, these traits matter more. An observer of Franklin Delano Roosevelt once quipped that the man had a second-class intellect and a first-class temperament. Given what disease took from Roosevelt's body, the truth of the remark is that the more illustrative temperament is everything. Temperament is everything. Our head and heart combine to form a kind of command system that rules our lives. Millions of years of evolution have combined to give us these gifts. Will we command them as tools, or will we let them languish, allowing ourselves instead to be jerked around like puppets? You decide. True. Ruling over yourself. You could say it was in her you could say it was in her from the beginning. Churchill certainly saw it. Upon meeting the baby who would become the great Queen Elizabeth II, Britain's longest-serving monarch, and likely the longest-serving in all of history, he noted, she has an air of authority and reflectiveness that's astonishing in an infant. Of course, the throne then lay some 2.5 decades in the future, on the other side of the world war, in an abdication crisis. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to say that. What Churchill sensed that day were the beginnings of the temperament that created an incredible life of self-control, service, and perseverance. A mental and emotional discipline that has rarely been seen, before or since, in the halls of grand palaces, especially in 25-year-olds who have suddenly become empresses or emperors. We want to think of leaders as bold and brash, charismatic and inspiring. We expect them to be ambitious. We even excuse tragic flaws or disturbing vices, as long as they're winning or entertaining us. There is no doubt makes This no doubt makes them compelling, but is the right recipe for stable, sustainable stewardship of a nation, a business, a sports franchise? More important, is that the only way? Is it the only way? Plato had a different ideal in mind, asking for a monarch who was young and possessed by nature of a good memory, quick intelligence, courage, and nobility of manner, and let that quality, temperance, as the necessary accompaniment of all the parts of virtue, attend now also on our monarch's soul, if the rest of his qualities are to be of any value. Born in 1926, Elizabeth had royal blood, but no clear path or even expectation to power. Certainly, few pegged her to fulfill that ancient philosopher's ideal. She was the daughter of the second son of King George IV. It was only after the rash decision of her uncle Edward the Eighth to walk away from the crown to marry a twice divorced Nazi sympathizer, and then the early death of her father, Elizabeth's destiny was set. Whatever Churchill had seen in her child, whatever Plato hoped for, she would have to cultivate, making willing herself into the Queen, Elizabeth, one of the most admired and enduring figures on the planet. From the day of her coronation, Elizabeth would reign but not rule, as the expression goes, holding with perfect grace a unique and terrible job. What does the modern British sovereignty do? It's hard to say. It's easier to list all the things they can't do. She can't pass laws. She can't choose who leads government. She can't start wars. She's not even supposed to speak out about matters of policy. And yet the irony of this powerlessness is the power required to wield it. The Queen has been duly informed of every action and problem inside the United Kingdom for 69 years in the form of daily dispatches and weekly conferences with the Prime Minister. At the same time, she is not allowed to overtly act in any of this information. She cannot, in any way whatsoever, involve herself in the matters of the state, all of which is done literally in her name. That's 30 minutes. Day 19. See you guys day 20. Thank you.